The morning sun peeked through the thin curtains of her tiny apartment, casting long shadows across the floor littered with textbooks, coffee mugs, and half-finished sketches. She sat cross-legged on the bed, pencil in hand, eyes fixed on a worn notebook filled with diagrams of wings, tail fins, and control surfaces. Her fingers moved quickly, adding notes in the margins, angles of attack, lift coefficients, stall speeds. It wasn't homework. It was habit. Ever since she was a kid watching planes carve white lines across the sky, she'd been obsessed with how they stayed up there. Now at 22, she was weeks away from finishing her aerospace engineering degree, and this flight back home was just another leg of a long journey that had started with a library book and a dream. She zipped up her small carry-on, tucked the notebook into her backpack, and double-checked her boarding pass. Denver to Salt Lake City, just under 2 hours. Short, simple, routine. She'd taken this route before, always in the same window seat, always watching the ground fall away until the world looked like a map. Today felt no different. She wore a faded hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, nothing fancy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Just going home to see her parents, to breathe mountain air for a few days before finals. At the airport, she moved through security with practiced ease, shoes off, laptop out, arms raised without being asked. She bought a black coffee from a kiosk, didn't add sugar, and sipped it slowly as she walked toward gate B12. The plane was a regional jet, small, with 2 seats on one side of the aisle and one on the other. She found her spot near the middle, stowed her bag, and slid into the window seat. The man next to her nodded politely and buried himself in a newspaper. She smiled back, then turned her attention outside. The tarmac shimmered in the late morning heat. Ground crew in bright vests moved with quiet efficiency. A fuel truck rolled away. Somewhere an engine whined to life. She loved this part, the calm before motion. The moment when everything was still, but you knew it wouldn't be for long. Boarding finished. The cabin door closed with a soft thud. A flight attendant gave the safety demonstration. Seatbelts, exits, oxygen masks. Her voice calm and practiced. The passengers barely looked up from their phones. She listened anyway. Old habit. Her professor once said, "Knowing what to do when things go wrong is half the battle." She never forgot that. The engines roared louder. The plane taxied slowly, then turned onto the runway. A pause, then acceleration, smooth at first, then forceful. The ground blurred. Her stomach dropped slightly as the wheels left the earth. She pressed her forehead against the cool window and watched Denver shrink below. Buildings becoming blocks, highways turning into threads. The Rockies rising in the distance like ancient bones. Inside the cabin, people relaxed. A baby cooed. Someone cracked open a bag of pretzels. The man beside her folded his newspaper and closed his eyes. She opened her notebook again, flipping past pages of calculations to a fresh one. She started sketching the plane's current configuration. Flaps at takeoff setting, gear retracted, angle of climb. It was how she passed time, not to show off, just to understand. Up front, in the cockpit, the 2 pilots were doing their own routine checks. The captain, a man with silver at his temples and 30 years in the sky, spoke in a low, steady voice. The first officer, younger, with sharp eyes and a slight frown, responded with crisp confirmations. They'd flown together a handful of times. Nothing special. Just another day on the job. 20 minutes into the flight, the sky was clear, blue and endless. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Flight attendants began moving down the aisle with drink carts. She declined coffee but accepted a bottle of water. She unscrewed the cap, took a sip, and glanced toward the front of the plane. Something felt off, not loud or dramatic. Just a subtle shift in the engine's hum, a slight vibration in the floor. She frowned. Then, without warning, the cabin lights flickered. A collective murmur rose from the passengers. The drink cart stopped. The flight attendant gripped the nearest seat for balance. In the cockpit, alarms blared, a sharp, urgent beep that cut through the usual drone of instruments. The captain's hands moved fast over the panel. "What the hell?" he muttered. The first officer scanned the screens. Autopilot just disengaged. Electrical system showing faults in flight control modules. "Switch to backup," the captain ordered. "I'm trying. It's not responding." Back in the cabin, the plane dipped suddenly, just a few feet, but enough to make stomachs lurch. A woman gasped. The baby started crying. Over the intercom, the captain's voice came through, calm but tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll have this sorted shortly." She didn't buy it. Minor didn't make the lights flicker twice more or cause the overhead bins to rattle. She leaned forward, listening. The engine noise had changed, uneven now, like one side was straining. Her eyes darted to the wing outside. The flaps looked normal, but the aileron, the hinged part near the tip, twitched erratically. Her heart beat faster, but her hand stayed steady. She closed her notebook and tucked it away. This wasn't the time for sketches. Minutes passed. The plane leveled out, but the tension in the cabin thickened. People whispered. A man filmed the wing with his phone. The flight attendants moved quickly, checking seatbelts, offering quiet reassurances they didn't quite believe themselves. Then came the real trouble. A loud pop echoed from the front of the aircraft, like a fuse blowing. The cabin lights went out completely for 3 seconds before emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a dim, eerie red glow. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling with a hiss. Screams erupted. She grabbed her mask, pulled it over her face, and took slow breaths. Her training kicked in. Not formal training, just years of reading, watching documentaries, studying accident reports. "Stay calm, assess, don't panic." Through the mask, she heard the captain's voice again, strained now. "Mayday, Mayday, United 482. We've lost primary flight controls and partial electrical systems. Requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport." Static crackled in response. Then a calm voice from air traffic control. "United 482, roger. Turn left heading 270. Descend and maintain flight level 200. But the plane didn't turn smoothly. It yawed sharply to the right, then wobbled like a car on ice. People cried out. Luggage shifted in the overhead bins. The man next to her clutched the armrests, knuckles white. She looked toward the cockpit. The door was closed, but she could hear raised voices, urgent, clipped. Something was very wrong. Worse than they were letting on. Her mind raced. She remembered a case study from class. A Qantas flight years ago where a computer glitch caused uncommanded pitch downs. Pilots had to fight the plane manually, while systems failed one by one. They'd survived because they stayed calm, worked together, and used backup procedures most people didn't even know existed. But here, something felt different. The captain's voice had cracked on the last transmission. And the first officer, she'd seen him during boarding. Young, maybe only a year or two out of training. Competent, sure, but untested in real crisis. Another jolt. The plane dropped again, this time longer. Her stomach rose to her throat. A child sobbed. Someone prayed out loud. She unbuckled her seatbelt, just enough to lean forward without standing. She watched the cockpit door, listened. The voices inside were frantic now, short sentences, curses under breath. Then silence, a terrible heavy silence. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She thought of her parents waiting at the airport, of her unfinished thesis, of all those hours staring at the sky, wondering what it would be like to be up here when things went wrong. She didn't know how to fly a plane. Not really. She'd never touched real controls. But she knew how they worked. She knew what the instruments meant. She'd spent nights in flight simulators, not for fun, but to understand the logic behind every switch, every warning, every procedure, and right now, the people who were supposed to know were drowning. She looked around. No one was paying attention to her. Everyone was either frozen in fear or trying to comfort someone else. The flight attendants were doing their best, but their eyes betrayed their own terror. She made a decision. Slowly, quietly, she stood up. The plane shuddered, but she kept her balance. She walked toward the front, gripping seatbacks for support. The red emergency lights made her shadow stretch long and thin down the aisle. One of the flight attendants saw her and stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." "I need to talk to the pilots," she said, voice low but firm. "You can't go in there. I might be able to help." The attendant hesitated. She looked at the cockpit door, then back at her. In that moment, something passed between them. Not words, but understanding. Fear, hope, desperation. The attendant nodded once quickly and tapped the intercom button near the cockpit. "First officer? There's a passenger. She says she has aerospace training. She wants to assist." A pause. Then a crackling voice. "Send her in, fast." The door clicked open. She stepped inside. The cockpit was chaos. Warning lights blinked like angry fireflies. Charts were scattered. The captain slumped in his seat, hand pressed to his chest, face pale and sweaty. The first officer was alone at the controls, muscles taut, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes when you realize you might not make it. He glanced at her, breathless. "You know aircraft systems?" "I've studied them," she said. "Not flown, but I understand the logic." "Let me help you think." He didn't argue. He couldn't afford to. He nodded toward the jump seat behind him. "Sit. Tell me what you see." She sat, heart hammering, but her voice stayed calm. "First, what's failed?" Flight control computer went haywire. Took out hydraulics on the left side. Autopilot's dead. Radios are spotty. And the captain? He swallowed. "He's not responding well." She looked at the instrument panel. Altimeter, airspeed, attitude indicator, all flickering. But some analog backups still worked. She pointed. "Use the standby attitude indicator. Ignore the digital." "It's glitching." He adjusted his grip on the yoke, eyes darting between screens. Okay. Outside the sky was still blue. Beautiful even. But inside time was running out. She took a breath. This wasn't a simulation. This was real. Lives depended on what happened in the next few minutes, and though she was just a passenger, a girl with a notebook and too many questions, she was now part of the crew, not because she wanted to be, but because no one else could. The cockpit smelled like sweat and stale coffee. Warning lights blinked in a rhythm that felt more like panic than procedure. The captain was slumped sideways in his seat, eyes half closed, breathing shallow and fast. His hand still clutched his chest. The first officer, alone at the controls, had both hands locked on the yoke, knuckles white, jaw tight. Every few seconds, the plane would lurch, as if something invisible was tugging at its wings. She sat in the jump seat behind him, heart pounding, but she forced her voice to stay even. "Tell me what you've tried." He didn't turn, but his words came out in short bursts. "Reset the flight control computer twice. Switched to alternate hydraulic system. Tried manual reversion. Partial response on the right side, nothing on the left. Radio's cutting in and out. ATC thinks we're descending too fast, but the altimeter's jumping around." She leaned forward, eyes scanning the panel. Most of the digital displays were glitching, numbers flickering, attitude indicators spinning wildly. But tucked near the edge of the instrument cluster was a small analog gauge, old school with a needle and a simple horizon line. It was steady. "Use that one," she said, pointing. "The standby attitude indicator. Ignore the big screen. It's feeding you garbage." He glanced at it, then back at the main display. "But the checklist says..." "The checklist assumes the systems are working." She cut in gently. "Right now they're not. Trust the backup." He exhaled sharply, then nodded. His shoulders relaxed just a fraction. He shifted his focus to the analog gauge. The plane stopped its wild bobbing and settled into a rough but stable descent. Outside, clouds rolled past like silent witnesses. The sun glinted off the wing, calm and indifferent. She turned to the captain. "Is he conscious?" "Barely." Said something about chest pain before he went quiet. The first officer's voice cracked. "I called for a medical emergency, but with the radio acting up. I don't know if they heard." She reached over carefully and checked the captain's pulse. It was there, fast, thready, but present. "He's alive. We need to keep him that way, but right now flying comes first." The first officer swallowed hard. "I've never flown manual this long. Not in real life. Simulators don't feel like this, no," she said softly. "They don't." She didn't say it to scare him. She said it because it was true, and because pretending otherwise wouldn't help anyone. But she also knew something else. Panic spreads faster than fire in a cockpit. So she kept her tone steady, like a friend talking you down from a ledge. "Okay," she said. "Let's break this down. What's working?" He ticked off on his fingers, voice gaining a little strength. "Engines are fine. Right side aileron responds a little. Rudder's sluggish, but there. Elevators, barely. We've got partial control." "Good. That's more than nothing." She flipped open her notebook, still in her lap, and tore out a clean page. With a pen from her pocket, she started sketching a crude diagram of the aircraft's control surfaces. If the left hydraulic system is out, we can't move the left aileron or part of the elevator. But we can use differential thrust. Push more power to the right engine to help turn left. He blinked. "You've read the emergency procedures for this model?" "Not officially, but I studied a similar incident." the Qantas A330 over the Indian Ocean. They lost hydraulics mid-flight. Pilots used engine power to steer. He stared at her for a second, then gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You're a passenger. I'm also someone who's spent the last 4 years thinking about how planes fall apart and how to keep them together. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Time was slipping away. Fuel was burning, and they were still too high, too fast, and too far from a runway. She leaned closer to the comms panel. Can you get ATC back? He tapped the radio. Static hissed, then a faint voice broke through. 482, respond. United 482, do you copy? Yes, we copy, he said, relief flooding his voice. We've got partial control. Captain's down. Requesting immediate clearance to nearest airport. Roger, 482. Cheyenne Regional is your closest option. Turn left heading 260. Descend to 10,000 feet. Emergency crews standing by. Copy. Turning left, descending to 10. He adjusted the yoke, but the plane resisted, yawing right. He grunted, muscles straining. Use the rudder pedals more, she said, and ease back on the right engine just a touch. Let the left pull you around, he did. Slowly, painfully, the nose began to swing left. The turn was wide, clumsy, but it was happening. Behind them, in the cabin, silence had settled. Not peaceful, but heavy. People weren't screaming anymore. They were holding hands, whispering prayers, staring at the floor like it might open up and save them. A flight attendant stood near the cockpit door, eyes fixed on the closed door, arms crossed like she was holding herself together. Back in the cockpit, the first officer wiped sweat from his brow with his sleeve. How'd you know about differential thrust? My professor made us analyze every major aviation emergency of the last 30 years. Said if you understand how things break, you'll know how to fix them, or at least slow the fall. He nodded, eyes on the horizon. Well, thanks for slowing ours. She didn't smile. Not yet, they weren't safe. But for the first time since the alarms went off, there was a thread of hope. Then the plane shuddered again, deeper this time. A new warning light flashed red. Gear unsafe. What now? He muttered. She checked the landing gear indicator. All 3 lights were out, no green, no red. It's not locked down. Or it's not showing. We can't land without gear. We can't land safely without gear, she corrected. But we might not have a choice. He looked at her, eyes wide. You're not suggesting... I'm suggesting we figure out if it's really up or if it's just the sensor. There's a manual release handle under the floor panel near your feet. Have you checked it? He shook his head. I didn't even know that existed. It's in the emergency checklist. Page 42, under landing gear failure, alternate extension. He stared at her. You memorized the emergency checklist? No. But I read it cover to cover last summer. Twice. He let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. Then he reached down, fumbling near his feet. After a few seconds, he pulled a red handle. There was a loud clunk from beneath the floor. They both held their breath. A moment later, 3 green lights blinked on. Gears down, he whispered. She let out the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Good, one less thing. But the relief was short-lived. The fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. We're burning extra trying to maintain control, he said grimly. At this rate, we've got maybe 40 minutes. Cheyenne was still 25 minutes away. We'll make it, she said. Not because she was sure, but because someone had to say it. Outside, the landscape changed. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, then the first hints of mountains in the distance. Snow-capped peaks glowed in the afternoon sun. Beautiful, deadly if they ran out of fuel before reaching the runway. She glanced at the captain again. His breathing was shallower. His skin had taken on a grayish tint. We need to get him help soon. I know, the first officer said, voice tight. But right now I need both hands on this plane. She nodded. Then she did something unexpected. She reached for the radio mic. Cheyenne approach, this is United 482. We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. Captain unresponsive, possible cardiac event. Request ambulance standing by on arrival. The voice on the other end was calm. Copy 482. Medical team will be on the tarmac. She handed the mic back. The first officer gave her a look, grateful, stunned. You're really good at this, he said. I've just read a lot, she replied. You're the one flying, and he was. Despite the fear, despite the weight of over 100 lives in his hands, he kept the wings level, the nose steady, the descent controlled. He wasn't a hero. He was just a person doing his best in a nightmare. And that was enough. She turned her attention back to the instruments. The airspeed was creeping up. Ease back a little on the nose. You're picking up too much speed. He adjusted. The plane responded sluggishly, but it listened. Minutes passed. The radio chatter grew more frequent, ATC guiding them in, clearing airspace, coordinating with ground crews. The first officer responded with growing confidence, his voice losing its earlier tremor. She watched him, saw the way his shoulders had stopped shaking, saw how his eyes, once wide with panic, now narrowed with focus. He was finding his footing, and she realized something. She wasn't just helping him fly. She was reminding him that he could. People forget in moments like this that expertise isn't just about knowledge, it's about trust. Trust in your training. Trust in the person next to you. Trust that even when systems fail, humans can still rise. She looked out the windshield. The sky was clear ahead. No storms, no turbulence. Just open air and a long glide path to safety if they could hold on. Then a new sound. A low groan from the left wing. Both of them froze. What was that? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Listened. Waited. Then, structural stress. The left wing's taking more load because we're compensating with the right side. We need to reduce bank angle. Keep it as level as possible. He nodded, making tiny corrections. How bad is it? If it was going to fail, it would have by now, she said. But we can't push it, he exhaled. Understood. Silence settled again, but it was different now. Not the silence of dread, but of concentration. Of two people working together, not as pilot and passenger, but as a team. She thought about the people behind them, the woman clutching her child, the elderly man who'd offered her a mint during boarding, the college student asleep with headphones on, probably still unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. She thought about her own parents, waiting at the gate, checking their phones, wondering why the flight was delayed. She thought about how, just an hour ago, she'd been sketching wings in a notebook, dreaming of flying one day. And now, in the most terrifying way possible, she was part of it, not in the cockpit by title, not by license, but by choice, by courage, by the simple act of standing up when no one else could. The first officer glanced at her. You ever thought about becoming a pilot? She almost laughed. Every day, but I figured I'd start with engineering first. Well, he said, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. You're doing a pretty good job of both right now. Ahead, the faint outline of Cheyenne Regional Airport appeared on the horizon, a thin gray strip against the earth. Small, quiet, their lifeline. We're going to make it, he said. More to himself than to her, she didn't answer. She just watched the runway grow larger, steadier, real. And for the first time since the alarm sounded, she allowed herself to believe it too. The runway at Cheyenne Regional looked smaller than it should. Just a pale gray line cutting through brown fields and dry grass. From up here, it seemed impossibly narrow, like trying to land a bus on a sidewalk. The first officer kept his eyes locked on it, hands steady on the yoke, but his breathing was quick and shallow. She could hear it over the low hum of the engines and the occasional static crackle from the radio. Wind's picking up, he said, voice tight, gusting from the west. She glanced at the windsock near the runway, bright orange, flapping hard. Crosswind. Maybe 15 knots. Yeah, and our left aileron's still dead. That means I can't counter it properly on final. She nodded. Without full roll control, a strong crosswind could shove them sideways on touchdown. Maybe even flip a wingtip into the ground. It was one of the most dangerous parts of any emergency landing. Do you have rudder authority? She asked. Some. Not great, but it's there. Then we'll use it. Crab the plane into the wind on approach. Nose pointed slightly left, then straighten with rudder right before touchdown. Keep the upwind wing down as much as you can. He gave a short nod, classic crosswind technique. But with half the controls out? It's all we've got, she said. And you've got me watching your back. He didn't reply, but his shoulders relaxed just a little. That was enough. ATC came through the radio, calm and clear. United 482, you're cleared to land runway 27. Wind 270 at 14 knots. Gusting to 18. Emergency vehicle standing by. Copy? Cleared to land runway 27, he responded, voice stronger now. Gear down, lights on, flaps at 30. She checked the flap indicator. Green, good. Every bit of lift helped. As they descended below 5,000 feet, the ground rushed up fast. Fields turned into roads. Cars became tiny dots. The airport grew from a line into a real place. Hangars, fuel trucks, fire engines lined up like silent guardians. In the cabin behind them, the flight attendants had gone through final preparations. Seatbelts double-checked. Tray tables stowed. Braced positions demonstrated with quiet urgency. No one screamed now. Just the low murmur of whispered prayers and the occasional sniffle. Fear had settled into something quieter, resignation maybe, or stubborn hope. She turned back to the cockpit. The captain hadn't moved. His breathing was faint, but there. She made a mental note. Get him to a hospital the second we stop. Flaps to 40, the first officer said. Reaching for the lever, she watched his hand. Steady, confident. He was in the zone now, the place pilots talk about, where time slows and everything narrows to the task at hand. But then, without warning, the plane shuddered violently. What was that? He snapped. She scanned the instruments. Engine readings normal. Hydraulics stable. Then she saw it. The left wingtip had dipped slightly, then snapped back up. Wing flex. The structure's stressed but holding. He exhaled. Feels like we're flying a kite made of paper. Just keep it smooth, she said. No sudden moves. They crossed the outer marker, 5 miles out. The runway filled the windshield. The crosswind tugged at them like an invisible hand. Starting crab, he said, turning the nose slightly into the wind. The plane angled sideways, but the flight path stayed true. She watched the horizon, the runway, the airspeed. Everything had to be perfect. Too fast and they'd overshoot. Too slow and they'd stall. Too far left or right and they'd miss the runway entirely. Airspeed's good, she said. 45 knots. Right on profile. Flaps full, he confirmed. 2 miles out. 1 mile. The fire trucks rolled forward, engines rumbling. Then, another alarm. A sharp, high-pitched beep. Did it stall warning? Light flashed red. Her stomach dropped. We're on the edge. I know, he growled, easing the nose down just a hair. But if I go any lower, we'll float past the runway. It was the oldest pilot's dilemma. Balance speed and descent. Too much of one, not enough of the other, and disaster followed. She thought fast. What's our weight? Near max landing weight. We didn't have time to burn or dump fuel. That explained the sluggish response. Heavy planes need more speed to stay airborne, but more speed meant longer landing rolls. And Cheyenne's runway wasn't long. Okay, she said. Then we land long, but we brake hard. Use reverse thrust the second you touch down. And I'll call out runway markers so you know when to pull back. He nodded. Talk me in. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on the approaching pavement. Runway threshold now. Halfway point coming up in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Her voice was calm, rhythmic, like a metronome keeping time in a storm. 3, 2, 1. Touchdown zone. The wheels hit the tarmac with a thud, then a screech as rubber met asphalt. The plane bounced once, just a foot off the ground, then settled. Reverse thrust, she said. He slammed the levers back. The engines roared in reverse, shaking the whole cabin. The plane slowed, but not fast enough. Brakes. Hard, he stomped on the pedals. The smell of hot metal filled the cockpit. Outside, sparks flew from the wheels. Runway centerline holding, she reported. You're good. The fire trucks raced alongside, matching their speed, ready to pounce if flames appeared. But there were none. Just smoke from the brakes and the sound of 100 hearts finally daring to beat again. At 60 knots, he eased off the brakes. At 30, he taxied toward the nearest turnoff. By the time they rolled to a full stop near the emergency vehicles, the plane was silent except for the ticking of cooling metal. For a moment, no one moved. Then the first officer slumped forward, forehead resting on the yoke. His hands trembled. She reached out, gently touched his shoulder. You did it. He didn't look up. We did it. Behind them, the cabin erupted, not in cheers, but in sobs. People hugged strangers. A child cried, "Mommy, are we safe?" Someone started clapping, then stopped as if embarrassed. But the sound spread anyway, soft at first, then louder. Not celebration, relief. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to the captain. His eyes fluttered open. Hey, she said softly. Help's here. He tried to speak, but only managed a weak nod. The cockpit door opened. A flight attendant stood there, tears streaming down her face. Paramedics are coming up. Within seconds, 2 EMTs entered, followed by airport fire crew. They moved quickly, efficiently. One checked the captain's vitals while the other prepped an oxygen mask. The first officer finally sat up, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "You okay?" an EMT asked him. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "Just tired." They helped the captain out of his seat and onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him away, he reached out weakly and squeezed the first officer's arm. No words, none needed. Then the EMTs turned to her. "You the passenger who helped?" She nodded. "You stay with him," the first officer said suddenly, pointing to the captain. "Make sure they know what happened." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be fine, go." She followed the stretcher down the aisle. Passengers turned to look, not with curiosity but with something deeper. Gratitude. Awe. One woman reached out and touched her sleeve as she passed. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the tarmac in golden light. Ambulances, fire trucks, police cars. Every emergency vehicle in the county seemed to be there. Reporters were already gathering beyond the fence, cameras raised, but she didn't see any of that. She walked beside the stretcher, giving the paramedics a quick summary. Electrical cascade failure. Partial hydraulic loss. Captain collapsed during emergency. First officer maintained control with assistance. The lead paramedic nodded. "You saved lives today." "I just talked," she said. He flew. Sometimes talking is enough. They loaded the captain into the ambulance. Before the doors closed, he looked at her one last time. His eyes were clearer now. He mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Then the doors shut, and the siren wailed to life. She stood there, alone on the tarmac, backpack slung over one shoulder, notebook still in her hand. The wind tugged at her hoodie. The plane sat behind her, quiet now, like a tired animal resting after a long run. Airport staff approached, police, airline reps, FAA investigators. They asked questions. She answered honestly, simply. No drama, no exaggeration. Just facts. One investigator, older, with kind eyes and a weathered face, listened carefully. When she finished, he said, "You broke protocol by entering the cockpit." "I know, but you also likely prevented a crash." She didn't respond. She didn't need praise. She just wanted to sit down, to breathe, to call her parents and tell them she was okay. As if reading her mind, an airline rep handed her a phone. "Your family's been calling." She took it with shaking hands, dialed. Her mother answered on the first ring. "Are you—" Her mom started, voice breaking. "I'm fine," she said. "The plane had trouble, but we landed safe. Everyone's okay." There was a sob on the other end, then silence. Then, "Come home." "I will." She hung up and looked back at the plane. The first officer was walking toward her, still in uniform, cap in hand. He looked exhausted but calm. "They're debriefing me in an hour," he said, "but I wanted to find you first." "Why?" "Because I need to say it to your face." He paused. "If you hadn't come up, I don't know if I could have done it alone." "You would have," she said. "You're trained for this." "Training doesn't always cover the feeling that you're about to die," he said quietly. "You reminded me I wasn't alone." They stood there for a moment, 2 strangers bound by something few would ever understand. Then he offered a small, tired smile. "What's your name?" She told him. He nodded like he was filing it away somewhere safe. "I won't forget it." Later, as she sat in the airline's temporary lounge, sipping warm tea wrapped in a scratchy blanket, she opened her notebook to a fresh page. Not to sketch, just to write. "Today I learned that knowledge isn't just for exams. It's for moments when the world falls apart, and someone has to hold it together." Outside, the sun dipped below the mountains. The sky turned pink, then purple. Somewhere a jet engine started up again. Life went on. But for one flight, on one ordinary afternoon, a passenger girl became something more. Not a hero, not a pilot, but a person who saw a problem and didn't look away. And that, she thought, was enough. The airline put her up in a small hotel near the airport, not fancy. Just clean sheets, a quiet room, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. She didn't mind. After everything, silence felt like a gift. She took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the tension in her shoulders, the smell of jet fuel, the memory of that awful metallic taste fear leaves in your mouth. When she came out wrapped in a thin towel, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was her dad. She answered. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, voice thick with worry. "I'm fine," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Really, just tired." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then softly, "Your mom cried for an hour after you called." She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be proud." She wasn't sure about that yet. Proud felt too big, too loud. Right now, she just felt human, shaky, real. They talked for a few more minutes about the weather back home, about her final exams, about anything but the plane. It was their way of pretending the world was normal again. When they hung up, she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cockpit, the blinking lights, the captain's pale face, the runway rushing toward them. She got up, opened her backpack, and pulled out her notebook. Flipped to the last page she'd written on. "Today I learned that knowledge isn't just for exams." She read it again. Then she turned to a fresh page and started writing everything she could remember. The sequence of failures, the radio calls, the exact moment the gear lights came on. Not for anyone else, for herself. So she wouldn't forget what it felt like to be useful when it mattered most. The next morning, an airline representative picked her up in a sedan. No fanfare, just a quiet knock on the door and a polite, "They're ready for your statement." She nodded, zipped up her hoodie, and got in. The debriefing room was plain, white walls. A long table, 2 chairs on one side, 3 on the other. 2 men and a woman sat across from her. One wore a dark suit, FAA investigator. Another had a badge, NTSB, the agency that looks into plane accidents. The third was from the airline safety team. All of them had kind eyes but serious faces. They didn't treat her like a hero. They treated her like a witness. And that was fine. She told them everything. From the moment the lights flickered to the second the wheels touched down. She didn't skip details, didn't soften the fear, didn't make herself sound smarter than she was. "I didn't fly the plane," she kept saying. "I just helped him remember what he already knew." The investigator nodded. "You recognized a failure mode most passengers wouldn't even notice." "I've read a lot of accident reports," she said simply. "When things go wrong, they usually go wrong in ways that have happened before." The NTSB rep leaned forward. Did the first officer seem overwhelmed? Yes, at first, but he pulled through. He just needed someone to talk him off the ledge. They asked about the captain's condition, about the radio issues, about whether she'd seen any warning signs before takeoff. She answered honestly. No guesses, no assumptions. When it was over, the airline rep handed her a new boarding pass. "We've arranged a flight home tomorrow morning. First class. And we'd like to cover your meals, lodging, and any counseling you might need." She almost laughed. "I don't need counseling. I need to finish my final project." They smiled, but it was gentle. They understood. Back at the hotel, she called her professor. He answered on the second ring. "I saw the news," he said before she could speak. "Is it true?" "Most of it," she said. "I didn't land the plane, but I was in the cockpit." There was a long pause. Then quietly, "You applied everything we taught you. Not in a lab, not in a sim, in real life." "I just didn't want anyone to die," she said. "That's the best reason there is." He told her to take the week off. She refused. "I'll be back Monday," she said. "I've got a thesis on flight control redundancy to finish." That night she couldn't sleep again. So she walked. Just down the street, past gas stations and fast food joints under streetlights that buzzed softly. The air was cool, dry, smelled like sagebrush and distant rain. She thought about how close it had been. How one wrong decision, one extra second of panic could have changed everything. She also thought about the first officer. Wondered if he was sleeping. If he was replaying it all in his head like she was. The next morning she boarded the replacement flight home. This time she didn't sit by the window. She chose an aisle seat near the back. She didn't want to watch the ground fall away. Not today. The flight was smooth. Boring even. The kind of flight people complain about because nothing happened. She smiled at that. Nothing happening was the best thing that could happen. When she got home, her parents hugged her so hard she couldn't breathe. Her mom kept touching her face like she needed proof she was real. Her dad didn't say much, just made her favorite soup and let her sit in silence on the porch swing. For 2 days she did nothing. Slept late, watched old movies. Walked the dog. Let the world feel small and safe again. Then on the third day, an email arrived. It was from the airline's chief pilot, formal but warm. They'd reviewed the cockpit voice recorder. They'd spoken with the first officer. They wanted to invite her to their training center to speak with new pilots about human factors, about how non-crew can sometimes see solutions professionals miss in the heat of the moment. She read it 3 times. Then she wrote back, "I'd be honored." A week later, she stood in front of a room full of cadets in crisp uniforms, all younger than her, all wide-eyed. She didn't wear a suit, just jeans and her old hoodie. She didn't give a speech. She told a story. "I wasn't brave," she said. "I was just paying attention. And when I saw someone drowning, I threw a rope, even if it was just words." Afterward, a young woman raised her hand. "Did you ever think about becoming a pilot?" She smiled. "Every day. But I thought I had to choose, engineer or pilot. Now I know you don't have to pick. Understanding how planes work helps you fly them. And flying them helps you build better ones." That afternoon, she called the local flight school, made an appointment for an intro lesson. The instructor was a retired airline pilot with a bushy mustache and a calm voice. He didn't know who she was. She didn't tell him. She just showed up, signed the waiver, and climbed into the right seat of a small Cessna. The engine started with a familiar rumble. The plane taxied down the grass strip. When they reached the end, he looked at her. "You ready?" She nodded. He pushed the throttle forward. The plane accelerated, bounced once, then lifted into the sky, and for the first time her hands were on the controls. Not in an emergency. Not in fear, but in peace. The ground fell away. The wind rushed past the windows. She adjusted the yoke, feeling the plane respond, alive, eager, trusting. She didn't say anything. She just flew. Later, back on the ground, the instructor turned to her. "You've done this before?" "No," she said. "But I've dreamed about it my whole life." He studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Well, you've got the hands for it. And the head. Come back next week." She did, and the week after that, each time she learned more. How to read the wind, how to trim the plane, how to talk to ATC without sounding nervous. She made mistakes, stalled once on final approach, overcorrected in a turn, but she kept coming back. One evening, as she walked home from the airfield, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the first officer. "Heard you're learning to fly. Good. The sky needs people like you." She typed back, "Thanks for showing me it's possible." She didn't post about it on social media, didn't give interviews. When reporters called, she politely declined. What happened on that flight wasn't hers to sell. It belonged to everyone who was there. The crew, the passengers, the controllers, the emergency teams. She was just one thread in a much larger tapestry. But in quiet moments, when she sat alone with her notebook, she'd sketch a new kind of diagram. Not just wings and hydraulics, but human hands on a yoke, voices talking through fear, strangers becoming a team in the dark. She knew now that flying wasn't just about machines. It was about people, about trust, about showing up when it matters, and someday, maybe soon, she'd be the one in the left seat, calm and steady, ready to help someone else find their way home. Until then, she'd keep studying. Keep practicing. Keep listening, because the sky doesn't care how old you are, what you look like, or what seat you started in. It only asks one thing. Are you ready? And for the first time in her life, she knew the answer. The first time she walked into the airline's training center as an official guest, she wore a simple blouse and slacks, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed hero. She didn't want to be a spectacle. She just wanted to talk to pilots the way one human talks to another, honestly, without masks. The room was full, captains, first officers, cadets fresh out of flight school. Some recognized her from news clips. Others had read the NTSB report. A few looked skeptical, arms crossed like they weren't sure a passenger, especially one so young, had anything useful to say to professionals. She didn't start with what she did on the plane. Instead, she asked a question. How many of you have ever frozen for a second during an emergency drill? A few hands went up. Then more. Good, she said, because that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. She told them about the moment she stood up in the cabin, the fear in her legs, the voice in her head saying, "Sit down. You don't belong there." She told them how her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her notebook when she first entered the cockpit, and how the only thing that kept her going was the thought, If I don't try, who will? One older captain raised his hand. You didn't have a license. You could have made things worse. I knew that, she said. But I also knew the systems. And more importantly, I saw that the first officer wasn't failing. He was just overloaded. His brain was full. All he needed was someone to hold the checklist while he flew. That changed the room. The skepticism softened. Because every pilot in there had been in a situation where too much happened too fast, where memory failed and procedure blurred. After the session, a young cadet hung back. Did you ever doubt yourself afterward? Every day for a month, she admitted. I kept thinking, what if I'd said the wrong thing? What if I'd distracted him at the wrong second? She paused. But then I realized in a crisis, silence is riskier than action. As long as your heart's in the right place, trying is always better than watching. The cadet nodded, eyes bright. I want to fly like you think, she smiled. Then study everything. Not just how to fly, but why things break, how people react, how teams fall apart or come together. Flying isn't just about the sky. It's about the people in it. Over the next year, her life settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings at the university, finishing her degree. Afternoons at the flight school, logging hours in small planes. Evenings with her parents or alone with her notebook, still sketching, still learning. She didn't chase fame. When a documentary crew reached out, she declined. When a book publisher offered a deal, she said no. That day wasn't mine alone, she told them. It belonged to everyone on that flight. But she did agree to one thing, helping redesign part of the airline's emergency training program. Not as an expert, but as someone who'd seen the gap between textbook procedures and real human panic. She suggested adding a module where pilots practice communicating with non-crew, flight attendants, passengers with technical knowledge during simulated emergencies. Because in real life, she said, help doesn't always come in uniform. The airline listened. Within a year, the new training was rolled out nationwide. Meanwhile, her own flying improved. She soloed after just 18 hours, earned her private pilot's license by summer, started working toward her commercial rating. The old Cessna became her second home. The smell of oil and leather, the hum of the engine, the way the horizon tilted when she banked into a turn. She never forgot the feeling of that emergency flight, the weight, the fear, the fragile thread of hope. But now when she flew, it wasn't shadowed by dread. It was filled with purpose. One crisp autumn morning, she got a call from the first officer. He'd been cleared to return to flying after medical leave. His first flight back? Denver to Salt Lake City. You're not serious, she said. I am, he replied. Same route, same airline, different day. There was a pause. Then he added, I'd be honored if you rode in the jump seat. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect. That route held ghost, but maybe it was time to lay them to rest. I'll be there, she said. The day of the flight, she arrived early, wore her student pilot jacket, navy blue, simple patch on the chest. No fanfare. Just showed up, signed the paperwork, and walked through security like any other crew member. When she stepped into the cockpit, he was already there, running pre-flight checks. He looked older, calmer, his hands moved with quiet confidence. You came, he said, smiling. I said I would. They didn't talk much before takeoff, just the usual checklist calls, calm and precise. But when the wheels left the ground and Denver shrank below them, he glanced at her. Feels different this time, he said. Yeah, she said. This time we know we'll make it. They flew in comfortable silence for a while. Then he asked, still planning to be an engineer? Both, she said. I've applied to an aerospace firm that works on flight control systems. And I'm saving for my instrument rating. He nodded. You'll change things, you know. Not just by flying, but by building planes that are harder to break and easier to fix when they do. She looked out at the endless blue. I just want to make sure no one ever feels as alone in a cockpit as you did that day. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was soft. You made sure of that already. The flight went smoothly. No alarms, no turbulence. Just two people who'd stared down disaster and come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. When they landed in Salt Lake City, she walked with him to the crew lounge. A few pilots recognized her, nods, quiet words of respect, no cameras, no speeches. Later, as she waited for her connecting bus home, she sat on a bench outside the terminal. The sun was low, painting the tarmac gold. A jet roared overhead, climbing into the sky. She opened her notebook. On the first page, she'd once written, "How do planes stay up?" Now near the back, she wrote something new. People keep them up. Not just pilots. Not just engineers. But flight attendants who calm crying children. Controllers who guide lost planes home. Mechanics who check every bolt. Passengers who pay attention. Families who wait at the gate. Flying, she realized, wasn't a solo act. It was a chain of trust, stretching from the ground to the stratosphere. A few weeks later, she stood on a small airfield at dawn, clipboard in hand, watching a group of high school students gather around a training aircraft. She was volunteering with a youth aviation program, teaching kids how to read instruments, understand weather, and dream big. One girl, maybe 16, with wide eyes and grease on her sleeve, asked, "Did you always know you'd fly?" "No," she said. "I just knew I loved the sky." The rest came one step at a time. The girl grinned. "I want to be like you." "Don't be like me," she said gently. "Be better. Ask harder questions. Build safer planes. Fly with kindness." As the students climbed into the simulator, she stepped back and watched. The morning sun warmed her face. Somewhere an engine started. She thought about that day on the malfunctioning jet, not with fear now, but with gratitude. It had changed her, yes. But more importantly, it had reminded her of something simple, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose to care. She never became famous, never gave a TED Talk, never had a movie made about her, and that was fine. The real work wasn't in headlines, it was in hangars, classrooms, cockpits, and quiet